Bad aim. A 29-year-old anarchist under arrest after posting a murder-for-hire plot aimed at Attorney General Pam Bondi. Plus, Charlie Kirk's alleged assassin was back in court. The judge's ruling, well, it'll impact the rest of his case. And Woke Women of the Year. A year-end list with 2 Rachels is ruffling some feathers. I'll tell you who they are and why. Those stories and more today, Tuesday, October 28th. I'm Caitlin Becker, and this is the New York Postcast. A 29-year-old anarchist, yes, an anarchist with a long rap sheet, has been arrested after he allegedly put a hit out on Attorney General Pam Bondi to the tune of $45,000. Tyler Maxon Avalos was nabbed after a tipster alerted the FBI to the alleged murder-for-hire plot that, ready for this? The suspect posted on TikTok. The social media post included a picture of Bondi with a red dot on her forehead, like the kind generated by a sniper's rifle scope. The caption read, quote, "Wanted Pam Bondi, reward $45,000, dead or alive, preferably dead." Now, who knows if this guy has access to 45 grand, but either way, the threat is being taken extremely seriously, as you might imagine, but especially considering the fact that Avalos has a criminal history, which includes charges of stalking and domestic assault. Russian President Vladimir Putin has been bragging about his new, quote, invincible nuclear missile. Now, those are his words, but I'm also really heavily using some air quotes here. Now, it was tested over the weekend, and if you buy the Russian propaganda, it was a huge success. Here's how it's supposed to work. The giant nuclear-powered rocket can theoretically carry a nuclear warhead just about anywhere in the world, say to New York or Washington, D.C. One Russian general called it a tiny flying Chernobyl. Not the most comforting imagery. And Putin believes it to be a unique product unlike anything else in the world. The Russian leader also asked his military to identify potential uses for it and begin preparing for its deployment. I mean, not to put too fine of a point on it, but I'm positive I know what old Vlad there wants to do with it. And so does President Trump. As you might expect, the president is not simply shrugging this off. He fired back during a chat with reporters during his Asia trip Monday.
They know we have a nuclear submarine, the greatest in the world, right off their shores. So, I mean, it doesn't have to go 8,000 miles. And they're not playing games with us. We're not playing games with them either.
A trans teen obsessed with mass shootings has admitted to plotting a Valentine's Day massacre at their Indiana high school. 18-year-old Trinity Shockley will plead guilty to felony conspiracy to commit murder in a deal that will send them to prison for 12 and a half years, with 5 more tacked on the end there for probation. Authorities say Shockley identifies as male and uses the name Jamie. Now, back in February of this year, Shockley was arrested after police received a tip that they had access to an AR-15, had bought a bulletproof vest, and was hooked on the idea of mass shootings. Now, Shockley had been planning the shooting to coincide with the anniversary of the Parkland School massacre. Now, in addition to the prison time, Shockley's plea deal includes being barred from owning a gun for life and a lifetime ban on researching school shootings. Now, their electronic devices will have protective settings where that type of activity can be perpetually monitored. The deal also includes requiring mental health counseling. The Republican-led House Oversight Committee has released a sweeping report into a possible cover-up of President Biden's health while in office. As part of that report, Republican Congressman, Committee Chair James Comer of Kentucky, is asking the D.C. Medical Board to investigate Biden's personal doctor, Kevin O'Connor. Comer claims that the doc was involved in a, quote, coordinated cover-up of Biden's mental decline and is arguing that he needs to be disciplined for it. The request comes after a 4-month-long probe into the ordeal, during which O'Connor repeatedly pled the fifth to avoid answering questions. The Post's D.C. bureau chief, Josh Christensen, has looked through this report, and he joins me now. So, Josh, let's start by focusing on this letter regarding Dr. Kevin O'Connor. What do Comer and the committee claim happened that would rise to the level of disciplinary action?
Well, based on a lot of interviews, they did over 14, or they sought at least 14 interviews, but they didn't get all of them with a lot of these key Biden allies. They found that O'Connor had not been forthcoming about some of the president's cognitive issues. And as a result, they referred him for further investigation to the DC Board of Medicine. This is significant because O'Connor was one of the people that they tried to interview in a deposition earlier this year, but O'Connor invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. He was one of only 3 members of the Biden administration to do that. And it led to a lot of furious calls that there was a cover-up of the president's cognitive decline, especially during his final years in office.
Now, there were other findings in this report. Can you walk me through what else the committee says they found?
Yeah, it's a very lengthy report. Probably the most critical things are some of these interviews they did with his former chief of staff, Jeff Zients, as well as some of the senior advisors who first were advising in the White House and then shifted towards a more campaign advisory role as he was seeking re-election. And they revealed for the first time that there were high-level discussions about the president's health. There was a discussion particularly after his June 2024 debate against Trump. And there was a kind of debate among them as to whether he should undergo some form of cognitive tests. But ultimately, that was ruled out because they basically determined that it would be seen as something that would try to combat what they thought was a political attack, not a earnest question from a majority of American voters about the president's mental cognitive acuity, about the president's physical health.
Now, when I hear you say mental cognitive acuity, it just brings me back to President Trump and the auto pen. President Trump takes any and every opportunity to really focus on that auto pen issue, kind of pointing to the fact that in his words or opinion, Joe Biden had to use it, quote unquote, had to use it. Does the report get into that at all?
That was the most outstanding finding, I think, if you read it and you've been following this issue, the main piece of the puzzle that hasn't been put in yet. And it was that the committee determined that the auto pen pardons should be made void, that the auto pen pardons, there was not enough of a paper trail or any other evidence to show that Biden truly approved each pardon that he granted. And there was a lot of reporting that the Post broke and that other outlets broke leading up to this report, showing that chain of custody, showing that there was a lack of authorization by Biden. And this committee report really affirms that, in addition to the witnesses that they brought forward testifying to that.
Now, all of this talk about former President Joe Biden just brings me to the larger question of what is the committee's ultimate goal here? Biden's not in office anymore. He's never going to run again. He's 82. He likely won't be able to be meaningfully involved in the next presidential election. So what's the upshot here for them?
They have 2 goals. One goal is accountability. They say it many times in the report. They've talked about it many times. Who's going to be held accountable for this cover-up that they've called out? And secondly, their goal is there any sort of legislation that Congress can pass to address this issue when it comes up, if it comes up in the future, when there is a future president who, will be older than Joe Biden, who was 81 years old during his final year in office, who appears to be suffering from some form of cognitive decline that is hampering his ability to carry out the duties of the office. What sorts of things can be applied so that Congress will actually have oversight? Because the whole frustration of a lot of these Republicans, it's also been echoed by Democrats, but it wasn't until, Biden was nearly out of the race or out of the race, is how were we supposed to know that Biden was suffering cognitive decline? And, some people have sort of mocked that and said that it was quite obvious. You had as early as fall 2022, Biden was calling out for a congresswoman at a function, and the congresswoman had died, weeks prior. It seemed to have no awareness that she was dead. But there was, to a degree, to a noticeable degree of both Democrats and Republicans, a silence from the Biden White House and an inability to actually know who was involved in the decision-making process, whether Biden was completely aware when he had some of these high-profile gaffes, some of which have been talked about endangering U.S. foreign policy. There was a discussion, in the past year or so about Biden coming back from Europe and talking about this was before Putin's invasion and sort of stumbling over his words and causing a bit of a foreign policy kerfuffle. So that's really the goal is how can there be legislation that can address this when there's complete blackout from the White House as to what the president is actually up to?
What's so interesting as I hear you explaining this, it's a question of, as a voter and as a citizen, of course, I feel like all of us want that kind of accountability and transparency for the person who is the leader of our country. Whether you like that person, whether you voted for that person, it doesn't matter. That is the president. So you should know. But what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So it'll be interesting to see if something like that is passed, if the person who is in office at the time that it is passed is going to want that kind of transparency focused on them. Such a fascinating look into the future crystal ball there. Josh, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on.
A Utah judge has agreed to allow Charlie Kirk's accused assassin, Tyler Robinson, to appear in court in street clothes and not a prison jumpsuit. I know that probably seems pretty minor, all things considered, but it was a win for the defense. There's a caveat, however. Robinson will still be required to wear restraints. Why is this a big deal? Well, it comes down to jury perception. Could someone sitting in a prison jumpsuit subconsciously make that person look guilty to 12 men and women? The drama here began last week after a secret motion from the defense was filed asking for the change. Motions and court documents flew back and forth, with the defense arguing that photos showing him in the prison's provided uniform and restraints could bias potential jurors and influence his chances for a fair trial. The legal teams involved in the case also asked to limit media coverage here, but the judge failed to make a decision on that just yet. Robinson's next hearing had been scheduled for this Thursday, but that's been pushed back, citing the need by the legal teams for more time. And finally today, fashion magazine Glamour is out with their Women of the Year list, and I'm not on it, which is appalling. And it's just not there without some drama. Not about me, but about other things. Rachel Zegler and YouTuber Miss Rachel, yes, two Rachels, joined the likes of Demi Moore, singer Tyla, and the women of the WNBA. The two Rachels both carry baggage around the Israel-Hamas war, which has some people criticizing their selection. Zegler came under fire while promoting her titular role as Snow White in Disney's live-action version of the classic animated film. She caused some controversy and chaos after she posted online, quote, "And always remember Free Palestine," after the first trailer of the movie dropped. Perhaps related or unrelated, the film totally bombed at the box office, and to be fair, it had a lot of other issues. But some blamed what they called her anti-Israel stance. Miss Rachel, full name Rachel Griffin Accurso, is a well-known YouTube personality with a channel full of educational children's videos. If you have a baby or somebody you know has a baby, you probably also know Miss Rachel. She made several posts about the deaths of children in Gaza and recorded herself praying for Palestinian kids. That prompted the group Stop Anti-Semitism to accuse her of being backed by Hamas. No such link was ever proven, but it was enough to anger people at the time. And again, now that she's being included in Glamour's list, those same people are angry the second time. The only thing I realize when these end-of-year lists round up honors, they all come out, is that I am getting old. Demi Moore, I know. Some of the others on that list, I had to Google. Who can keep up? Lucky for you, you don't need to keep up with the news in the mornings because you have me for that. So don't forget, like and follow the New York Postcast wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Make sure that I am sitting in your phone every single weekday, ready to give you the 411. See what I mean? 411. No Gen Alpha kiddo is getting that reference right there.